I'd like to thank the Congress for inviting me to speak. The subject I was given, amongst others, was shaping the future of upstream technology. I would just say that I don't have a video, and if you ring that bell, I'm going to leave the room, because I've not had a safety briefing. So, the conference brochure lists a lot of subjects that I might address. There are some I'm happy to, and others that I'm not going to discuss. For example, I've been asked if I would discuss what are our next major technology developments, and I'm certainly not going to do that in a public forum in front of my competitors. However, even without that, the subject remains rich and perhaps deserves a little history before we move into the detail. My friend Jeroen van der Veer, the recently retired CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, used an analogy to describe the roles of the various players in the oil and gas industry. He called the governments and national oil companies the landowners, the IOCs the architects, and the service industry the plumbers. And while his description has merit, it no longer captures the full complexity of the industry. Governments and national oil companies play a role well beyond that of landowner today, while the service industry has increasingly moved beyond that of simple plumber, and the large service companies now manage many trades, can often be called upon to be the construction or project managers. We increasingly, dare I say it, give advice to the architects on aspects of design. And it's instructive to briefly retrace how this situation came about. Firstly, resource nationalism in the past went an awful long way to changing the service company's role with the NOCs. It's not new. It began in Mexico in 1938. It continued in Iran in the 1950s, and led eventually to the wave of Middle East nationalizations in the 1970s. In the decade following 2000, resource nationalism was rife. As a major industry trend, Russia sought to capture a greater share of the rent, Venezuela closed again, the Middle East did not open significantly, Mexico didn't open at all, Libya opened, but recent events have showed how transitory that was. Sanctions kept Iran and Sudan largely off limits. And after a spate of extraordinary discoveries, Brazil started to restrict access not to investment, but to foreign operators in the pre-salt domain. And the result of all this is that perhaps 75% of the world's known conventional oil reserves are closed to international private capital today. Could I get a glass of water, Annie? While 60% of the production originates from non-NOC operators. The consequence of this has been to widen the range of national oil companies, both in structure and in competence. Some have become major offshore operators, while others have mastered complex project managers. Still others, thank you very much. Still others are emerging with increasingly large international portfolios. Secondly, prior to the oil shocks of the 1970s, many of the international oil companies, besides exploiting their assets, also developed and deployed what would be thought of today as service company technology. They maintained their own service divisions and owned their own service equipment. This was particularly true outside North and South America, as the service industry had an immature geographical presence in the Eastern Hemisphere. As a result of the sustained explosion in E&P activity following the oil price surge of 1973, the service industry began to invest in rapid worldwide expansion. Growth in the 70s and 80s was phenomenal. By the end of the period, the service industry found itself with many new players, a deeper understanding of technology, and the wherewithal to deploy it worldwide. The age of oil companies having their own service operations was fast diminishing. Service companies began spending extensively in R&D to improve their relative competitive position, and operators substantially reduced their service arms. Then the oil price collapsed, and for the following decade, activity fell. The world steadily absorbed the excess production capacity established in the 1980s. Prices remained depressed, and everybody began scrutinizing budgets. R&D became more focused on reducing finding and development costs, and operators recognized the duplication between their own efforts and those of the service companies. Operators closed whole departments and even whole laboratories. They also sold off the last of their service assets, mostly offshore rigs and seismic boats, that they had built a decade earlier to ensure they had supply. a situation which is not dissimilar to what is happening today. The trend has continued, with R&D spending by the major international oil companies, although increasing rapidly, is not matching the overall rate increase in the service industry. The period of low oil prices also led to a massive consolidation in the service sector, where the three major service companies expanded from small enterprises specializing in particular technologies to global operations offering a wide spectrum of services and products. A similar wave of consolidation occurred in the period following the financial crash of 2008. Backed by strong R&D and considerable training resources, the service industry's range of competencies has increased. They have at times been pushed in this direction by the operators themselves, who looked for greater integration at the level of their suppliers to reduce costs. I'm sure many of you remember Shell's drilling in the 90s and BP's Partners per Profit, both aimed at reducing drilling costs in the North Sea through greater integration of the service providers. The third element of this has been the emergence of a new breed of national oil company. They are very often ambitious and they're anxious to learn how to exploit their own domain. They're often specialized in a particular aspect of the exploration and production business, most closely associated with their own domain, offshore operations or very large project management, for example. Before discussing this further, I'd like to take a minute to demonstrate from our own portfolio how fast this relationship has evolved. If I compare our top 30 customers in 2010 to those of 2002, there has been little change, at least in their respective distribution. There were and are 5 super majors. In 2010, we counted 13 NOCs in the top 30, up from 12 in 2002. On the other hand, there are now 12 independents, down from 13. However, the shift in revenue between customer groups is extraordinary. In 2002, the super majors represented 33% of our top 30 by revenue. This declined to 22% by 2010. And in the same period, revenues from the NOCs almost doubled, while independents declined. These figures are close to industry-wide CapEx trends that show that NOCs and independents now represent 80% of the total industry spend. Among these, no less than 30 oil and gas companies have annual CapEx budgets in excess of $4 billion, which is up from only 10 companies in 2001. There are currently over 200 projects with CapEx either realized or planned of over $1 billion. Let me now turn to some of the other questions I've been asked to address in the context of the relationship between OSCs and oilfield service companies and NOCs. Let me talk about technology relationships between the service industry and the NOCs. It's important to recognize that the NOC's objectives with technology may be very different from the companies driven by shareholder returns. They are more often interested in long-term recovery factors that will optimize their nation's hydrocarbon rent rather than the net present value of cash flow. They are very often will look at technology for what they need to achieve on a very long time frame. They are very often more ambitious in their technology goals that they set themselves. And finally, particularly in this cycle, they are deeply motivated by their need to learn. Indeed, most of the technically ambitious joint R&D projects that Schlumberger has are with national oil companies, but not all. We have one very notable project with a super major. However, as a general rule, NOCs are more willing to invest in high-risk, long-term R&D in conjunction with the service industry. This is very different for the position of the 1970s oil environment. NOCs want to create the means to sustain the industry without too much help from outside, and they want their industry to be a motor for their broader economy and to create jobs. It's no longer sufficient in many places to bring technology from outside, although this obviously has a role to play where technology developed elsewhere is applicable. Increasingly, it's important that technology be adapted to local circumstances, be they carbonate reservoirs in the Middle East, deep water activity in Brazil, or Arctic exploration in Russia. Finally, it's possible in this day and age to decentralize technology development while still maintaining access to laboratories located in more traditional R&D centers. In our own case, the two most obvious decentralizations we have made have been to Saudi Arabia and Brazil. In both cases, we have built and staffed research laboratories in close proximity to the national oil company, as well as to a leading university in the country. The Schlumberger Dhahran Carbonate Research Center is in the Dhahran Technical Valley campus and works in close cooperation with Saudi Arabia, as well as the King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals. We are currently advancing its role with a new advanced seismic processing center, as well as test facilities for certain technologies related to gas production. The center has been in operation since 2005 and has over 50 patents in its own name or filed jointly with Saudi Aramco and others. The second example is from Brazil, where in November 2010 we opened the Schlumberger Brazil Research and Geoengineering Center. The center was conceived on the basis of conversations with Petrobras, as well as visits by Petrobras to our Saudi Carbonates Research Center, which led to a number of joint R&D projects in the context of improving the understanding of pre-salt formations. It is built on the research park of the University of Rio de Janeiro. However, again, it is not purely a research center and houses two other activities which are important for Schlumberger. It is a data processing center for excellence in seismic data processing, especially for 4D and combined seismic and electromagnetic measurements. In addition, the center will participate in software development for products in the Schlumberger Information Systems family. Both these centers, Dhahran and Rio, fulfill research roles and as such are a key part of the Schlumberger product development process. They contribute to the technical aspirations of the national oil company, and they serve to advance the body of technical knowledge in the countries concerned. If these are extreme examples, they are by no means the only one. We enjoy technical relationships of varying degrees of depth with many other national oil companies. We do fundamental science in Russia. Norway is our third largest center for R&D. We have a center for heavy oil in Venezuela, and we use our most advanced land seismic technologies in close cooperation with the Kuwait National Oil Company. The pattern of technology advancement with the NOCs is fundamental to what we do as a service company. There is increasing specialization as time goes on and problems diverge. The second area where the relationship between NOCs and service companies has developed considerably over the last few years has been in the area of workforce competence. The latest Schlumberger Business Consulting HBAR benchmarking study has revealed the extent to which the big crew change is still a thing of the future. The recruitment between the years 2004 and 2008 has gone some way to increase the numbers, but will not be sufficient or recent enough to compensate for the loss of experience that is soon to occur through retirement of the generation hired by the industry in the 1970s and 1980s. It is estimated that the industry will have a net loss of 5,000 of the 85,000 experienced petrotechnical professionals over the age of 35 between now and 2014. However, what is more remarkable is the differing attitude of the companies to how they will deal with this loss. In the benchmark survey, in response to the question, how do you mitigate project staffing difficulties, 3 options were proposed. In every case, independent, major, or national oil company, everybody intends to use new technologies to increase the productivity of their petrotechnical professionals, with the strongest constituency being amongst the independents. Astonishingly, in reply to the question on the use of standardization or codification to enable more junior staff to work on projects, only the majors have this seriously in mind. In outsourcing non-core competencies, both the independents and the NOCs see this as an additional source of productivity. What are the non-core activities that can be outsourced? By far the most consequent that has built up over the last 12 years has been the advent of integrated project management, where well construction in varying forms has been outsourced to the service industry. In January, our integrated project management well construction group completed drilling its 5,000th well. These have been drilled all over the world, but the majority have been in Latin America, in Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina. The activity has had considerable success in Russia and parts of the Middle East. And the slide I show you is that in its latest form, it has been the business model of choice for companies re-entering Iraq, as it brings efficiencies in managing both security and logistics, as well as reducing the number of personnel on the ground. The second form of IPM activity has been in the management of mature production. In this area, the service industry brings to the NOCs access to skilled personnel as well as new technology. The business model is dependent on mutual success, and the service company is generally incentivized on exceeding pre-agreed incremental production targets. The service company will typically risk its service costs. We currently conduct activity on this model in the Far East, Middle East, and Latin America. As the world's production base continues to mature, we think that the service industry's role in assisting NOCs as well as other customers will continue to expand in these areas. The service companies, and particularly Schlumberger, also play a major role in assisting NOCs to increase their workforce competency. Indeed, the most common theme that Schlumberger Business Consulting encounters amongst its NOC customers is a request to assist them in designing and building a plan to create technical competency within their organization. There is no one model here, but it is astonishing how most all the NOCs have ambitions to build workforces that rival in competence that of international private capital. Several have created their own universities, while others scholarship postgraduate studies in Western or Eastern schools. Many have now introduced technical ladders to encourage and motivate technical careers. The service industry provides a lot of technical training to NOCs. Secondments to learn special skills are common. Schlumberger has been hiring engineers in all the countries where we work for the last 40 years. And inevitably, a portion of the nationals that we hire find their way back into their domestic exploration and production industry. They are usually excellent ambassadors for the training in technology and management that Schlumberger provides, and we are pleased to count several senior managers in national oil companies who started their career as Schlumberger field engineers, and I met one here this morning just before I started talking. Finally, I was asked to say a few words about costs. As the world moves towards poorer and more difficult and more expensive hydrocarbons, be they unconventional gases, heavier oils, smaller accumulations in more complex geological settings, the costs of extraction will rise. Deep water, more difficult geology, all add to the cost and risk. We believe that, as in the past, cost and risk will be mitigated by two factors. The first is technology, which will still improve dramatically the cost of extraction, as well as the economics of ultimate recovery for conventional oil. We also believe that technology will vastly reduce the cost and waste associated with the current methods of producing unconventional gas. Secondly, the industry needs to dramatically improve its operating performance. It is estimated that 30% of greenfield projects have at least a 50% budget overrun. As a result of all this, we put in place in 2007 an initiative to help our customers dramatically improve their operating performance, and we call this excellence in execution. We invest more than $1 billion a year in product development, ranging from groundbreaking research that drives innovation to detailed engineering of our next generation commercial products. Today, our product development organization manages over 700 projects and supports more than 2,500 commercial products. In 2007, we conducted a comprehensive evaluation and benchmarking, comparing our performance against leading companies in other technology-driven industries as part of this excellence in execution program. And from this, we concluded that huge potential existed in achieving better reliability and lowering the cost of ownership for our products, and ultimately improving both their functionality as well as their reliability to help our customers meet their cost challenges. However, there is another dynamic in our ability to meet our customers' performance requirements. The consequences of the Deepwater Horizon tragedy, where 11 men died, and which led to the largest spill in U.S. history, will change some of the ways that the service industry works forever. Amongst these, the reliability of technology as well as the operating efficiency in project planning and execution and the regulatory consequences of Macondo will add a new dimension to offshore operations in three areas: regulation, technology, and capability or competence. Stricter standards of regulation will require much improved process from the service industry. Technology will be needed to improve safety as well as operational performance, and competency will need to be managed through improved process. It's therefore essential that our technology address not only the challenges of exploration, increased drilling intensity, the changing customer base, more remote operations and increasing complex geological settings, it's also got to respond to the new deep water requirements post-Macondo and help to mitigate higher operating costs, particularly offshore. The operational side of our program Excellence in Execution targets field and well site operations in terms of people, process, as well as product maintenance. In a major drive towards better product maintenance, we have over the past few years been building out newer and larger operation bases in all parts of the world. These newer and larger bases enable standardization and more robust maintenance practices based on lean principles. All this leads to reductions in maintenance times and in numbers of operational failures, and which drive for us asset utilization. And in North America, pressure pumping, for example, we have doubled our asset utilization during the past year. In the 4 years since Excellence in Execution began, we have halved the amount of non-productive time in our client operations. Of course, these efforts cannot contain all cost. And we all know that much of the cost inflation is due to the boom and bust nature of the E&P investment cycle. We go regularly from famine to feast, and our customers' attitudes towards cost and availability of supply of products and services change accordingly. It is, in fact, the NOCs where we see the smallest fluctuation in activity, as they tend to have, as I previously mentioned, longer-term time horizons and therefore more stable work programs. Finally, amongst all the confusions arising between IOCs, NOCs, independents, and service companies, without mentioning the confusion around certain business models, we maintain it's fundamental for each sector of the industry to maintain a clear vision of where they play. For Schlumberger, this means that we remain an independent service company who will not take equity stakes in the development of oil and gas reserves or production, because we wish to maintain a consistent relationship with all our customers, to whom we will offer exactly the same services, be they NOC, IOC, or independent. Ladies and gentlemen, while I may not have answered all the questions laid out by the organizers, I hope I have given you some insight into how the service industry interfaces with the NOCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew Gould. I didn't have to ring the bell. You were very succinct. And I noticed you didn't answer the question about what is in your black box.
No.
But I suppose that was too much of a wish. Does anybody have a question for Andrew? If I may, I'll ask you a quick one. I was fascinated by your slide which showed the ebb and flow of investment in R&D, which is an investment in technology, which is key to your business. What I wanted to know is whether post-Macondo, which you alluded to in your speech, whether there hasn't been any sense of a change in behavior by IOCs or NOCs in terms of what they're going to outsource, whether they're going to be passive investors or operators in the industry. What's your perception on the ground of what's happening?
I think it's going to be very much like the nuclear or the aviation industry. In other words, that I don't think that many IOCs or NOCs are going to take back in-house disciplines that they let go 20 years ago. But I do think that they're going to require proof of capacity to perform and traceability for everything that they do. So, for example, in this, if you look at cementing, the degree of traceability that they're going to ask for on any deep water cementing job is going to be completely different from what it was before. And the other thing that's going to happen is that the service industry, if they're not happy that the cementing job went well, is going to have a duty to tell their customer that that job didn't go very well, which is totally countercultural at this point in time. So actually the change in attitudes is going to be the most important of the things that will happen.
Oh, just one question here.
Mr. Gould, that was a very impressive synthesis of history. Could you comment, you mentioned there were 3 large service providers now. To what extent is there differentiation in their cultures and deliveries?
Well, they all grew out of different origins, and all companies to a certain extent retain their origins. So I don't want to comment on my 2 principal competitors, but Schlumberger's origins were in subsurface measurement. And it's still the idea that you measure pervades almost anything that we do. So, I think the differences largely come from where they originated, and while they integrate other disciplines, it's always their primary discipline that tends to come through in everything that they do.
Thank you. Any other questions? One there, in the back.
Mr. Gould, John McCreary from Bain & Company. Just a quick question. How do you see the collaboration and the competition to your business model from the Eastern service companies?
Well, I mean, long term, China will grow a competent service business. But today, the way the Chinese have grown their service business has been on the basis of their competitive advantage, which is cheap labor. And so they've been very successful in the businesses that require lots of cheap labor, the two obvious examples being land seismic with their company BGP, and land drilling, where there are now several hundred Chinese drilling rigs scattered around the world, run by Chinese drilling companies. They have not yet put an R&D effort into the higher technology ends of the service business that makes them a real competitor. And we're quite surprised that they've been slow to do that. But I've absolutely no doubt that with time they will do it. So yes, there will be Eastern competition, and we just have to hope that the cost of operation of things in the East goes up before they become too competitive with their technology.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andrew Gould.